The call didn't ring. It didn't even give me the mercy of voicemail. One flat tone, then silence. That was how I learned my son had blocked me 3 weeks after I put my paid-off house, my business, and my name behind his dream. I stood in my kitchen in Sparks with my phone in my hand, and grease still under my fingernails from a freezer repair I had just finished. I called again, because fathers do stupid things when fear is louder than pride. Same tone, same silence, same answer. My name is Martin Whitaker. Most people call me Marty. I'm 62 years old, and for 34 years, I've owned Whitaker Kitchen Repair in Reno, Nevada. I fix walk-in coolers, fryer lines, hood systems, and every other piece of restaurant equipment that quits at the worst possible time. I built that company with a used van, a toolbox, and a back that still reminds me every morning what it cost. So when my son Kyle looked across my kitchen table and asked me to co-sign a $385,000 loan for his first restaurant, I told myself this was what fathers did. You stand behind your boy. You help him become the man he says he is ready to be. Then the bank called. Not Kyle, not his partner. The bank. A woman named Linda Carver asked me to come downtown before I made any decisions. She said there were documents I needed to see in person. And when she slid that folder across the conference table, I saw my son's signature 8 times, but the signature wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the name printed beside it. A name my wife had warned me about from the beginning. Elaine and I bought the house in Sparks in 1996, back when the neighborhood still had lots and desert wind could throw dust across the street. It was a 3-bedroom place with a cracked driveway, a leaking sprinkler line, and a garage big enough for my tools. To me, that was wealth. We paid it off 2 years before I turned 60. I remember standing in that garage with Elaine after the last payment cleared, both of us too tired to celebrate properly. Just listening to the old refrigerator hum beside my workbench. Marriage teaches you that peace doesn't always look like a vacation photo. Sometimes it looks like a paid-off roof, a wife reading on the couch, and no one calling after midnight because a restaurant freezer died. We raised 2 kids under that roof. My daughter, Allison, was 31, steady as sunrise, a nurse practitioner who pulled 12-hour shifts at a community emergency clinic and still called her mother every Wednesday. Allison had never once asked me for $1. Not for college, not for her wedding, not when she and Mark were saving for their first home on 2 tired paychecks. Then there was Kyle, 35, my son, smart, funny, talented with food, the kind of man who could charm a dining room before bread hit the table. But Kyle never landed gently. Every few years, there was a new plan, a new job, a new almost, and every time, I told myself he was finding his footing. Kyle brought Derek Mallory to dinner on the first Tuesday in March, which should have told me the meal was not about Elaine's pot roast. My son arrived wearing a pressed shirt instead of kitchen blacks, carrying a laptop bag like it held his future. Derek came in behind him with polished shoes, a silver watch, and a smile that made every sentence feel rehearsed. He shook my hand too long, called me Mr. Whitaker, and complimented the house before taking off his coat. After dinner, Kyle opened the laptop at our kitchen table and showed us Juniper Table, a small restaurant in Midtown Reno. Open kitchen, local beef, Nevada trout, house bred, honest food done. He had floor plans, supplier lists, menu drafts, startup costs, projected revenue, even photographs of the empty space with red circles marking where the prep line and walk-in cooler would go. I had seen Kyle excited before. I had seen him talk fast, chase ideas, get bored, move on. This was different. His voice had weight in it, purpose. He wasn't selling a fantasy that night, at least. That was what I believed. Elaine looked at me across the table, and I knew she saw it too. For the first time in years, our son looked like a man building something. The number was $385,000. Kyle said it softly, like lowering his voice could make it smaller. The SBA loan would run through Sierra Pacific Bank downtown. He and Derek had scraped together savings, a little investor money, and a lease deposit. But the bank wanted someone with clean credit and real collateral standing behind the note before they released the construction draws. Derek leaned back while Kyle talked, letting my son carry the emotional weight. That bothered me later. At the time, I mistook it for respect. "Dad," Kyle said, folding his hands on the table, "I'm not asking you to pay for anything, I swear. You're not writing a check. You're just standing behind me on paper." There it was. The sentence that found the soft place in me. Not money. Belief. A father wants to hear his son say he needs belief more than rescue. Elaine didn't speak until they left. She rinsed 2 coffee cups in the sink, set them down carefully, then looked at me through the kitchen window reflection. Marty. That Derek man worries me. Why? He watches everything, she said. The house, your tools, the photos on the wall. He looks at this family like he's already figured out what it's worth. I laughed it off. Not because it was funny, but because I needed it to be wrong. Kyle had finally found a dream with both hands around it. I told Elaine he deserved one real shot. What I did not tell her was that part of me needed that shot too. I wanted proof I had raised him right. On April 4th, I sat in a glass conference room on the 3rd floor of Sierra Pacific Bank while Linda Carver placed the personal guarantee in front of me. She did not rush me, I'll give her that. She went page by page, her reading glasses low on her nose, explaining construction draws, default clauses, collateral rights, and the part that should have made me stand up and walk out. If Juniper Table fails to repay, she said, tapping the page with one red fingernail, the bank can pursue your personal assets, your home, your business accounts, any non-exempt property tied to your name. Kyle sat beside me, quiet. Derek sat across from me, nodding like this was ordinary. I looked at my son, and he gave me a small smile that said, "Trust me, Dad." So I signed. My signature took less than 3 seconds. Understanding what it had cost me would take much longer. Long enough to nearly cost me everything I owned. For the first 8 weeks, Juniper Table looked real enough to make a cautious man feel foolish for ever doubting it. Kyle texted me photos almost every other day. Concrete floors stripped down and polished, a rough opening cut for the hood vent, stacks of lumber against one wall, a used 6-burner range sitting under plastic wrap, waiting to be installed. He asked me questions about compressor loads and drain lines, things a man only asks if he is actually planning to open a kitchen. I stopped by twice in May. Both times, Kyle met me out front with a hard hat tucked under his arm, grinning like a kid showing me a treehouse. Derek was there too, always on his phone, always saying some version of, "We're right on schedule, Mr. Whitaker." I wanted to dislike him less, for Kyle's sake. I tried. Sunday evenings became our routine. Kyle would call after dinner and walk me through the week. Permits cleared, equipment deposits paid, framing delayed but handled. Investor nervous but calm. Every call ended with, "Thanks, Dad. I mean it." And every time he said it, something old and hungry in me believed him. Elaine stayed careful. She never said "I told you so" because nothing bad had happened yet. But when Kyle's name lit up my phone, she watched my face before she watched the screen. Then late June came, and the rhythm changed. One Sunday passed with no call. I told myself restaurant build-outs were chaos. The next Sunday, nothing again. I texted him Monday morning, "Busy week, Dad, talk soon." That was it. 4 words and a period, not my son talking. My son managing me. On July 9th, I found an envelope from Sierra Pacific Bank in the mailbox. It was addressed to me as guarantor, and said Juniper Table had missed a scheduled draw reconciliation. I read the sentence 3 times at the kitchen counter, while Elaine stood behind me. Waiting for me to say it meant nothing. I called Kyle, voicemail. I called the next morning. Voicemail again. By July 12th, I had called 9 times. Every message I left sounded less like a father and more like a man trying not to beg. Then on Sunday, July 14th, I called one more time. No ring, no voicemail, just one flat tone and a dead line. That was when I knew my son had not disappeared. He had shut the door from the inside. I called Gus Ramirez because I needed one man in my life who would not wrap the truth in kindness just to spare me. Gus and I had known each other since the early 90s. Back when he ran a diesel repair bay 2 doors down from my first shop, he had a scar over one eyebrow, bad knees, and the irritating habit of being right when you most wanted him to be wrong. We met at a booth in a 24-hour diner off East 4th Street. I laid out the missed bank notice, the unanswered calls, the deadline. Gus listened without touching his coffee. When I finished, he leaned back and looked at me like a mechanic listening to an engine knock. "Marty," he said, "a grown man does not block his father 3 months after borrowing his name unless something is burning." "He might be embarrassed," I said. Then he calls. "Embarrassed men call. Guilty men hide." The words hit harder because they sounded unfair and possible at the same time. Then Gus asked the question I had been avoiding. "Have you gone to the restaurant?" Tuesday morning, before my first service call, I drove to Midtown Reno with a tool bag on the passenger seat I did not need. I told myself I was only checking progress. maybe catching Kyle before the crew arrived, maybe proving Gus wrong. Juniper Table sat between a tattoo shop and a closed boutique on a block that should have been waking up. I expected new glass, a painted sign, maybe the smell of sawdust from workers getting started. Instead, half the windows were covered in brown paper. A chain hung through the front door handles. The city permit was curled at the edges. Sun faded. Out back, the grease-trap trench sat open under plywood, and the hood system Kyle had texted me about was nowhere near installed. The dumpster was full, but not with fresh work. Old drywall, broken studs, debris that had been sitting through heat for weeks. I pressed my palm to the glass and looked through a gap in the paper. No prep tables, no walk-in cooler, no range line. Just shadows, bare concrete, and one extension cord running across the floor. I had spent 34 years around restaurant build-outs. That room had not eaten $200,000. I stepped back from the door. And for the first time, I understood something Kyle's silence had been trying to tell me. The answers were not inside that restaurant. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. If you're just joining me, grab your coffee and stay with me. Because this is where the story stops being about a quiet son and starts becoming something much darker. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because 3 days after I stood outside that empty restaurant, a woman from the bank called me in, opened a folder, and showed me why Kyle had vanished, and who had really stolen everything. The call came Friday, July 19th, while I was kneeling behind a sandwich shop on Virginia Street with my arm buried deep in a dying ice machine. My phone buzzed, unknown Reno number. I almost ignored it because the compressor was hot and the owner was hovering behind me like staring could make the repair cheaper. But something in my chest tightened when I saw the first 3 digits. This is Martin Whitaker, Mr. Whitaker. My name is Linda Carver. I'm a senior loan officer with Sierra Pacific Bank. We met in April when you signed as guarantor for Juniper Table. The alley went quiet in a way it should not have. Traffic still moved beyond the dumpsters. The machine still rattled, but all I heard was her voice. I remember, I said. There was a pause. And in that pause, I understood she was choosing every word before letting it touch me. I need you to come into the downtown branch today, if you're able. There are documents related to the loan that you need to review in person before you make any decisions. What decisions? I'd rather not walk through this over the phone with only half the context. My hand tightened around the phone. Is my son in trouble? Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Whitaker, please come in. I left the ice machine half open, told the owner I had a family emergency, and drove downtown with my work shirt still smelling like refrigerant and fryer grease. The whole way, I kept calling Kyle in my head, even though I knew the line was dead. Sierra Pacific Bank looked the same as it had in April. Same marble floor. Same framed desert photographs. Same elevator to the 3rd floor. But when Linda opened the conference room door, she was not alone. A man in a suit sat beside her with a thick folder under his hands. This is Marcus Bell from our fraud and risk department, Linda said. Fraud. That single word landed harder than any missed call. Linda motioned toward the chair I had sat in when I signed my name. Then she slid the folder across the table. Linda opened the folder like she was opening a wound she did not want to touch. Inside were bank statements, draw request forms, vendor invoices, inspection notes, and copies of electronic transfers. Marcus Bell turned the pages slowly. Not dramatic, not angry, just precise. That made it worse. Rage would have given me something to fight. Precision gave me nowhere to hide. The original loan amount was $385,000, Marcus said. Structured in construction draws tied to documented milestones. Build-out, equipment, permits, opening inventory. I know how restaurant build-outs work, I said. And my voice sounded rough even to me. He nodded. Then you'll understand why this raised concern. He slid over the first sheet. $238,000 had already been released over 10 weeks. I stared at the number until it blurred. Then, I thought about that empty room in Midtown Reno. Brown paper, bare concrete, no walk-in cooler, no line installed, no prep tables. That space doesn't have $238,000 in it, I said. No, Marcus replied. Based on our internal review and the one legitimate contractor invoice, we estimate visible completed work closer to $52,000. My mouth went dry. Linda pointed to 3 vendor names. One was real, a flooring company I recognized. They had done actual work and been paid a fair amount. The second was Silver Basin Equipment Leasing. The third was Mallory Hospitality Services. I looked at that name, then looked up. Mallory. Marcus did not blink. Registered in Carson City. Mailing address is a private box. Managing member listed as Derek Mallory. For a second, I heard Elaine's voice in my head. He looks at this family like he already figured out what it's worth. Marcus continued. Invoices from Mallory Hospitality Services were submitted for project management, vendor coordination, and equipment consulting. The funds were released into an account connected to that entity, then moved again within 24 to 48 hours. Moved where? Some to cash withdrawals, some to personal debt payments, some to an asset purchase we're still tracing. I looked down at the invoices. They were clean, professional, almost boring. Letterhead, line items, dates, amounts, the kind of paperwork honest people trust because they cannot imagine someone would build a lie that carefully. Then Marcus turned to another page. These draw requests required both partners' authorization. I knew what he was going to show me before he showed it. Kyle Whitaker, my son's name, my son's signature, not once, not twice, 8 times. Right there. The room tilted slightly. Or maybe I did. I put one hand flat on the conference table and stared at the ink like it might explain itself if I waited long enough. There is a kind of pain that does not arrive as anger. It arrives as quiet. I sat in that conference room staring at Kyle's signature, and for a few seconds, I forgot how to breathe like a normal man. 8 draw requests, 8 places where my son had put his name, beneath numbers that did not match the work, beside invoices tied to the very man Elaine had warned me about. Are you saying Kyle stole this money? I asked. Linda folded her hands on the table. Marcus looked down at the file, then back at me. We are not saying what your son knew, Marcus said carefully. Bank records can show signatures, transfers, timing. They cannot show intent. Intent, that word felt almost cruel. Because intent was the only thing I needed to know. Had my son been fooled? Had he been scared? Or had he sat across from me in my own kitchen, asked me to stand behind him on paper, then helped Derek Mallory drain that loan while my house sat underneath it like bait? Linda slid another page forward, softer this time. You will likely receive a formal default notice within 10 business days, she said. I wanted you to see the full file first. People panic when they get letters like that. They make decisions before they understand what happened. Why call me in? I asked. Her face changed just a little. Because in April, before you signed, you asked me 3 times what would happen to your house if this went wrong. I remembered, and suddenly, I hated myself for signing anyway. I drove home from Sierra Pacific Bank with the folder on the passenger seat, buckled in like something alive. Elaine was in the kitchen when I walked in. She had a cutting board out, a tomato half sliced, the knife resting beside it, but she was not cooking anymore. She looked at my face, then at the folder under my arm, and her shoulders dropped before I said one word. Marty, she said. Tell me. I sat at the kitchen table and tried. The first few sentences came out wrong. Too many numbers, too much bank language, draw requests, vendor invoices, structured diversion. I sounded like a man reading from someone else's disaster. Then I said Derek Mallory's name, and Elaine closed her eyes. I knew it, she whispered. There was no victory in her voice, no satisfaction, just grief wearing the shape of a warning that had come too early for me to respect. You were right, I said. About him. About the way he looked at us. She sat across from me and touched the folder with 2 fingers, like it might burn her. And Kyle, that was the question I had been avoiding since the conference room. I looked toward the hallway where his old graduation photo still hung crooked on the wall. I don't know, I said. I don't know if our son betrayed us, or if he's too ashamed to admit he got used. Gus was the one who stopped me from driving to every apartment, restaurant, and friend's couch in Reno looking for Kyle. I called him after Elaine went to bed. Though neither of us slept, I was standing in the garage with the folder open on my workbench. Kyle's signatures spread between socket trays and compressor gauges, like evidence from somebody else's trial. I'm going to find him, I told Gus. No, he said. You're going to find a lawyer first. I need to hear my son say it. You need facts before feelings, Gus said. Because if you go in angry, you'll hear guilt in every word, even if he's telling the truth. I hated how much sense that made. The next morning, I sat across from Patricia Lang. Though everyone in town called her Trish. She had an office near the courthouse, no fancy view, no soft music, just shelves of binders and a woman who looked like she had never been impressed by a man raising his voice. I gave her the folder. I told her about the loan. Derek, the empty restaurant, the blocked calls, Linda Carver, and the 8 signatures. She listened without interrupting, making short notes with a black pen. When I finished, she leaned back. Mr. Whitaker, as guarantor, you have rights. We can request the full loan file, all draw documentation, communications, inspection notes, and internal fraud flags. Do not confront Derek, do not threaten anyone, and do not decide what your son is until we know what the paper says. What if the paper already says it? I asked. His name is there 8 times. His signature is there, Trish said. That is not the same as his intent. I looked away because that word had followed me home from the bank. She tapped the folder once. There is a legal difference between a partner who knowingly steals and a partner who signs under pressure. Ignorance or manipulation. There is also a moral difference. You may not like either version, but they are not the same story. For the first time since that dead phone line, I felt my anger slowed down enough to become something useful. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Strategy. And strategy, unlike panic, could still save my house, my business, and maybe my son too. Trish requested the full loan file before noon. Sierra Pacific sent it through a secure portal late that night, and I opened it at my kitchen table, while Elaine sat across from me with tea neither of us touched. The file was ugly in the way business disasters are ugly. Not dramatic. Just dates, signatures, attachments, inspection notes, emails, numbers that looked harmless until lined up. I took out a legal pad and started building a timeline, because that is what I do when panic gets too loud. I measure, I mark, I look for what does not fit. Around 1 a.m, I found the email. It was buried under the thread labeled Vendor Schedule Adjustment, dated June 18th, timestamped 11:42 p.m. Kyle had sent it to Derek. Derek, I walked this site today and checked the Mallory Hospitality invoice against the actual work. The numbers don't match, Silver Basin hasn't delivered half the equipment listed, and the hood system is still untouched. Where is the rest of that money going? I need a straight answer tonight. Or I'm calling Linda at the bank tomorrow. I read it once, then again, then a third time slower. Elaine looked up. What is it? I could barely get the words out. He saw it. 4 minutes later, Derek had replied. Kyle, calm down. You are reading this wrong. Supplier deposits don't always show up on site immediately. If you call the bank now, you'll freeze the draw schedule, kill the project, and make us both look like idiots. Let me walk you through it in person tomorrow. Do not call Linda. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen until my eyes burned. My son had asked the question I would have asked. He had seen the hole in the numbers before the bank called me, before I stood outside that empty restaurant, before I decided fear was proof. That did not make him innocent, but it meant the story in my head had cracked open. Kyle had tried to turn toward the truth once, and someone had turned him back. 2 days later, Gus found Kyle before I did, not through private investigators or some brilliant legal trick, through his nephew, who still cooked nights at a casino steakhouse and heard things from line cooks the way mechanics hear things from tow truck drivers. He's working graveyard at the Silver Spur Diner, Gus told me, off the highway, using K White on the schedule. I drove there at 11:17 that night and sat in the parking lot with both hands on the wheel. Engine off, watching trucks roll past under the yellow lights. I had imagined finding Kyle in a cheap motel, or hiding at Derek's place, or drunk somewhere feeling sorry for himself. I did not imagine this. Through the front window, I saw my son behind the pass, standing over a flat-top grill in a stained apron, flipping hash browns for 3 men at the counter. His face looked hollow. His shoulders had collapsed inward. He had lost weight. 30 pounds easy, maybe more. This was not the confident man who had opened a laptop at my kitchen table and shown me a restaurant dream. This was a man trying to disappear while standing under fluorescent lights. Then he looked up and saw me, outside, behind the Silver Spur Diner. Kyle broke before I said a word. He leaned against the brick wall, hands buried in his hair, and whispered, "Dad." I screwed up. I wanted to ask 100 questions. I wanted to grab him by the shirt and shake the truth loose. Instead, I waited. "I found out in June," he said. "Derek was moving money through those vendor invoices. I confronted him after I sent that email. He told me if I called Linda, he'd say I approved every draw. He said my signatures were already there, and yours was behind the loan, so the bank would bury us both before they believed me. His voice cracked on both. I panicked. I thought if I could work nights, sell some things, maybe cover enough before anyone noticed, I could fix it quiet. Stupid, I know. But I couldn't call you. I couldn't hear your voice and lie, and I couldn't hear your voice and admit what I'd done. He looked at me then, eyes red under the diner light. So I blocked you, he said, not because I didn't love you, because I was ashamed you would stop loving me. I looked at my son under that buzzing diner light and felt two truths fighting in my chest. One truth was simple. Kyle had not planned to steal from me. He had not sat in my kitchen with Derek and decided my house was something they could gamble with. The other truth was just as simple. He had signed those draw requests. He had ignored the first wrong number. Then the second. Then the third. He had let fear make decisions that belonged to honesty. And when the fire started spreading, he shut me out instead of picking up the phone. A father wants one clean answer. Villain or victim. Betrayal or mistake. But real life does not always give a man clean categories. Sometimes your child is hurt and responsible at the same time. Kyle wiped his face with the back of his wrist, embarrassed by every tear. Are you going to turn me in? He asked. I stared at him. If the truth turns you in, then that's what happens, I said. But we are done hiding from it. His face folded. I did not hug him. Not then. A hug would have been too easy, and what he had done was not small. But I did step closer and put one hand on his shoulder. Get in the truck, I told him. You're going to tell me everything, every date, every lie, every signature. And then we fix this the right way. The next 10 days were not loud. That is what people get wrong about revenge. They picture shouting, threats, a man kicking down doors. Mine started with a legal pad, a printer, and my son telling the truth until his voice went hoarse. Trish brought Kyle into her office the next morning. I sat beside him, not to protect him from consequences, but to make sure he did not run from them. He wrote a statement for Sierra Pacific's fraud division, the June 18th email, Derek's threats, the invoices, the meetings after hours, each draw request signed without demanding backup. Marcus Bell's team moved faster than I expected. They pulled business registrations, transfer records, and vendor addresses. Mallory Hospitality Services led to a private mailbox in Carson City. Silver Basin Equipment Leasing led to an account Derek controlled through a cousin's LLC. Then Marcus found the part that turned my stomach cold. Derek had done it before, 2 years earlier, under a different company name. He had helped drain startup funds from a small brewery outside Carson City. That owner had gone bankrupt before he could fight back. On August 2nd, prosecutors filed charges against Derek Mallory for wire fraud, forgery, and bank fraud tied to the Juniper table draws. Because Linda had frozen the remaining $147,000, the damage stopped before my entire guarantee collapsed on top of me. Restitution opened against Derek's personal assets, including a wake boat he bought in May, while Kyle was wondering why the hood system had not been installed. The bank restructured my liability down to legitimate work only. $82,000. Still painful, but no longer fatal. Kyle sold his truck the following Monday. Not for drama. Not because I demanded it. Because the payment was too high, the insurance was stupid, and a man trying to repay a debt does not get to drive around Reno in leather seats. For 4 months, he rode the bus before sunrise, worked prep at a downtown steakhouse by day, then took the graveyard grill shift at Silver Spur after midnight. He smelled like fryer oil and dish soap every time he came to my kitchen table with another money order. I did not pay his share. I helped him read the statements. I showed him where the interest hid. I made coffee when his hands shook from exhaustion. Some debts are not entirely your fault, but if your name is on them, your hands have to touch the repayment. Somewhere in the middle of building the timeline for Trish, I found a text message I had forgotten existed. It was from Allison, sent the night after Kyle and Derek first pitched Juniper table at our kitchen table. Dad. I don't want to sound negative, but Derek makes me uneasy. I've seen men like him in emergency rooms. They talk smoothly when things are calm, then disappear the second someone has to take responsibility. Please be careful before you put your name on anything. Love you. I sat there with my thumb over that message and felt smaller than I had felt in the bank. I had answered her that night with, "Thanks, sweetheart. I'll be careful." Then, I had done nothing. I never called her, never asked what she noticed, never gave her instinct the weight I gave Kyle's dream. Allison had spent her whole adult life standing on her own feet. And because she never made noise, I had mistaken her strength for not needing attention. That was when the story stopped being only about Kyle's mistake. It became about mine too. And that realization hurt in a different, quieter way. I called Allison the next Sunday and asked her to come by for dinner. I told her it was just family, but she heard something in my voice because she arrived with that calm nurse face she wears when bad news is already in the room. Elaine made lasagna. None of us ate. After dinner, I set the printed text message on the table. Allison looked at it, then looked at me, and I watched her understand that I had understood. "I owe you an apology," I said. She shook her head. "Dad, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." My voice came out rough. "You warned me about Derek. You saw something I refused to see because I wanted Kyle's dream to be real, more than I wanted to be careful. That was not fair to you." Allison was quiet for a long time. Then she said the sentence that hurt worse than anger. "I'm used to you worrying about Kyle first." I looked down at my hands. She had never asked me for money. Not for school, not for her wedding, not when she and Mark were saving for their house, even her dream. A mobile clinic for uninsured patients, she only mentioned like it was weather. And somehow, I had called that independence proof she needed less love. In September, Elaine and I went back to Trish Lang's office. Not for Kyle, not for the bank, but for something I should have thought about years earlier. We changed our estate plan. The house would still be divided fairly when we were gone. Kyle was still our son. And fairness matters even when disappointment is fresh. But we added protections this time: no business partner, no spouse, no creditor could drag our children's inheritance into someone else's mistake. Then we created a separate trust for Allison, $95,000, funded from savings Elaine and I had built slowly, earmarked for the mobile clinic Allison had been too humble to ask for and too tired to stop dreaming about. When I told her, she cried at our kitchen table. Elaine squeezed my shoulder beside me. "Dad, I didn't do anything to deserve this," she said. I reached across and took her hand. "That's exactly why you do." Juniper Table never opened. The lease died, which fit a place that had been built mostly out of lies. Kyle signed the release, handed over the keys, and walked away from the name, the menu, the logo. All of it. He said trying to save that restaurant would feel like cooking dinner in a burned-down house. He went back to work downtown, not as an owner, not as a dreamer with a laptop, but as a line cook who showed up early and kept his station clean. Slowly, he became a sous chef. Slower still, he started saving. Derek's case kept moving through court. Restitution recovered part of the money. Not enough to erase the damage, but enough to prove the paper trail mattered. Marcus later told Trish they had connected Derek to another failed food business outside Carson City. That mattered too, because the revenge was never just watching him fall. It was making sure he could not do it again. I think about those 4 days more than I want to admit. 4 days between the dead phone line and the bank folder. 4 days where I had already started building a whole version of my son out of fear. In that version, Kyle was a thief. Derek was a stranger who had helped him. I was the fool who had raised a man capable of selling out his own father. Parts of that story were true. Enough of it was false to nearly ruin us. That is the danger of pain. It feels like evidence when it is really only alarm. Love, I learned, cannot mean signing anything placed in front of you because someone carries your last name. It cannot mean ignoring the quiet person who warns you because the louder person needs saving. Love without questions is not loyalty. It is hope dressed up like wisdom. Kyle is still my son. He made a serious mistake, and I will not sand the edges off that truth to make either of us comfortable. He was careless. He was scared. He let shame drive while honesty sat locked in the trunk. Now he pays for that every week with tired hands and bus rides before sunrise. Allison never asked me to notice her. That was my failure, not her strength. She showed up, told the truth softly, and expected nothing back. These days, I try to love my children with clearer eyes, not less. Better. Some nights, after Elaine has gone to bed, I still sit at that kitchen table and remember Linda Carver sliding that folder toward me. "You need to see this before you do anything." At the time, I thought she meant the loan. Now I know she meant almost everything. See the person, see the pattern, see the truth clearly first, then decide who deserves your signature, your trust, your money, and the pieces of your heart too. If this story stayed with you, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Share your thoughts below, and I'll see you in the next sweet family revenge story.